This episode is brought to you by Amazon. The holidays are here, and you know what that means? It's time to get your friends and family the gifts they deserve. Take the stress out of shopping with Amazon's great deals and low prices on a huge range of items from toys to tech and much more. Whoever you're gifting for, Amazon has great prices on everything you need this holiday season. Shop early holiday deals now.
Kroger Delivery has one mission: to deliver the freshest food right to your door. That's why our drivers are pros. Our trucks are refrigerated. And when it comes to low prices, we always deliver. With $20 off your first order of $75 or more, there's no better time to get in on the action. Mission accomplished. Restrictions apply. See site for details.
Welcome to the Writing Black Joy podcast, where we celebrate the joyful narratives of Black creatives, changing the world one story at a time. I am your host, Sophia Robinson. Here, you'll find conversations with some amazing Black writers and creatives, learn more about their projects and the joy they're bringing into the world, find inspiration for your own creative ventures, and dive deep into the topics that we think and write about. The guests on this podcast are writers of fiction, nonfiction, poetry, music, plays, and so much more, as well as creative guests whose work is all around writing joyful narratives on history's pages. So if you are a writer, a creative, or a lover of the arts, or you simply want to hear some good conversations, keep on listening and welcome to the show. Welcome back to Writing Black Joy. Today I have with me Dionne Draper, and you may have already heard her voice as she interviewed me on the first episode of the season. So I would have mentioned a little bit about her then, but here is even more about Dionne as we go into her episode for this season. Dionne, like all of us, is many things. She is the executive producer and host of DAWTA The Podcast, the founder of Sing with Soul, a professional writer, actor, and singer. Winner of Women of the West Award and the Lord Mayor's Medal, Sing with Soul's productions include DAWTA The Podcast, DAWTA, a one-woman musical, Bristol Take The Knee, which is an online protest in 2020, and the Sing with Soul Choir. Dionne's acting and recording credits include The Cure, Trollied, Holby City, Little Shop of Horrors, and Rooty. And her guest appearances and features include The Jeremy Vine Show, BBC Spotlight, London Live, and The Stage Online. Combining academia, racial justice, and music to empower diverse voices is central to Dionne's creative work. In 2021, she studied diversity in the music industry in a master's in popular music practice. Following her master's, Dionne was appointed the head of music and singing at the Bristol Old Theatre School, leaving 1 year after to pursue her passion to decolonise music spaces. Alongside her acting and music career, Dionne is collaborating in a multi-agency network with fellow creatives and professionals to study, promote, and embed soulful African-based music practices across the music industry. Dionne and I had an amazing conversation that touched on many things, but central to it was the idea of joy being something that can be and is present in the midst of so many other things going on in the world, including a pandemic, lockdown, a civil uprising, and a life that is composed of joys, tragedies, and every possible emotion. And this is an idea that is central to this podcast. We talked about Bristol during the pandemic, where the statue of Edward Colston was pulled down during a protest after the murder of George Floyd and thrown into the Bristol Harbour. And you can see a link to an article I wrote on that in the show notes. And a few weeks ago, there were more protests in Bristol and across the UK. And in the midst of this, Bristol was able to be home to a large protest that brought the community together. And so we talked about joy and music being a legacy of the Black community during times of civil uprising. I'm so glad we went into this, and it is something that I talk about more this season, accessing joy in the midst of life being life. Dionne and I talked about the song that she wrote during the pandemic lockdown to build community and capture a moment of joy in a shared experience. And you'll hear her singing a tiny bit on the podcast as well. We also talked about creating an online protest during the pandemic and the power of technology to bring communities together. The synergy between the music of people of African descent and protests, bringing Black joy into all parts of life, writing her one-woman musical, DAWTA, and what inspired her to tell her story of being a transracial adoptee, the value of being seen and telling your story, how a change in language and understanding around decolonization and issues of supremacy can change the experiences of individuals being impacted by racism, how writing and performing the play as fiction allowed her to build empathy for those in her life, even those she had never met, bringing an alter ego onto the stage, switching characters during her performance as she played multiple characters, what she is thinking of for her next creative adventure. And she talked a bit about her podcast, DAWTA, and I've dropped the link in the show notes as well. I hope that you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. Welcome back to Writing Black Joy. Today I have with me a lovely guest, Dionne. Obviously, the audience will have heard all about you in the intro, but I know over the last few years you have created some projects around joy and particularly around Black joy. So let's talk a little bit about those projects. What led you to start creating those projects?
Well, I guess the first project that specifically looked at Black joy would have been the Joy song that I wrote during lockdown. And Black girl magic and Black joy hadn't really become a thing, and it wasn't central to my thoughts at the time. But what was central to my thoughts was we're all in this shared experience. Mm-hmm. We're all locked down and we're all in our kitchens and in our homes. And how can we find joy in the limitations of our lives? So that was the central premise. How can we find joy in the limitations of our lives? And so I was also running a choir at the time. Before lockdown, I had been running it for 6 years. It was called Sing with Soul, and it's now my music production company. And there were these challenges of being able to communicate and sing with my choir. Suddenly we weren't able to meet collectively. So bringing in these ideas of being confined to this space, but wanting to reach out and connect through song and music as we would in a choir, I thought, well, why don't I write a song that we can do collectively so we can get that community between us. But we can also inspire people as well and help people to feel together and united, even though we're in our own homes and we can't meet each other live.
Yeah.
So that was really the beginning of having a project on joy. And the outcome of that was that we produced a video, the choir and myself put together clips of different fun things that they did at home, from baking banana bread and dancing in the kitchen, gardening, sewing, all of these things, and then edited it all together into a video. And the song was called Joy. I also wanted it to be something that people could sing along to.
Yes, which it is. I'm going to put the link in the comments. It's so fun. I've listened to it a few times. I love it. Yeah.
Thank you. And there's a little breakdown in it. Move your feet. Shake it out.
I love it. Yeah.
I found joy in my life. So that was like the hook, if you like. Yeah. And it was for people to sing along to, do their own fun clips, send them in to us. So it was really a community call to find your joy.
Yeah, I love that. And I have so many questions that I think I told you before we hit record that I sing in a choir. I only moved to Plymouth 2 years ago today, actually. Today is the exact 2-year anniversary of moving to Plymouth.
Oh, happy Devon anniversary.
Why, thank you. And I've been singing in choir here for the last year, and I know they started just before lockdown as well. And they had some similar challenges. So, and I have another friend in London who also runs a choir, and she was saying the same. So I think it was like a universal experience, you know, it's like this thing that everybody's experiencing. And also it's this thing that everybody's experiencing. So you're kind of connected through that. this is kind of off track, but you were in Bristol during lockdown. And of course, there was the whole thing of the statue. Anybody who doesn't know, I actually wrote an article about it. I'll drop it in the show notes. But I'm sorry, this is unrelated, but I was in Bristol a few weeks ago, literally looking at that statue in the museum. And I'm just curious how did that play into your whole like lockdown experience and your community?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's very timely because it's on my mind at the moment. On a side note, I also work as a training manager and we are doing work around racial justice and equality, equity. And so it's coming up in my thoughts around particularly the recent riots and people, allies, and members of the community protesting against the far right and really standing up. And Bristol really, really stood up, in their thousands. And I felt conflicted around being there. I also felt conflicted around being at the lockdown marches.
Yeah.
Because I'm a bit of a good girl sometimes and I've been told to stay in and I've been told to wear masks. I've been told to be 2 meters or whatever, 2 foot distance.
Yeah. Social distancing.
Now. Social distancing.
Oh my goodness. Well, listen, this is an aside, but sometimes I still walk around and I see like those 2 meter signs, social distancing, and I'm just like, oh my goodness, did people live through a pandemic? Like, anyway, I'm sorry. Yes, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but
But exactly. But you're taking me back to that time of, abiding by rules. You're asking me, how being in Bristol, how did it feel at that time? Well, actually, I came together with then Councillor Cleo Lake, who is a Green activist and was our previous Lord Mayor as well. And we're good friends. And we said, let's do an online protest. And so we did. We had 25,000 people who attended our online protest. We broadcast from 12 o'clock in the day through, it was going to be till 5, but I think it ended up being 7 because we had the young people who were in there, in the marches, being our, correspondents who were there at the statue. So we were actually filming the statue being pulled down. They were reporting for us and we were able to share that on our online platform.
Wow.
But it is connected to your message around Black joy, because it was very much making protests accessible for people everywhere. Yeah. And so we also had sisters and brothers from New York who were doing dance for us online. We were doing a variety of different workshops as well throughout the day that collectively brought people together. And it was very much people of African descent.
Yeah.
We very much spoke about how this was a space primarily for people of African descent to have voice, have space, have time to contemplate this protest, have time to meditate on the murder of George Floyd and and react, because that had so much of a ripple effect in our own lives as people of African descent. We were grieving, we were confronting a lot of racism ourselves. And so it was very much creating that place for us to come together and community, in a way that actually being at the protest, that would have been a different type of collective experience. But this was very much curated to be an experience where we could come together and protest collectively.
And the thing I like about that was that, the other thing that really exploded during the pandemic was our use of technology to connect and how we kind of fed into that. And I think, that is something that you can't separate out all of those things. Like it was a pandemic. There was George Floyd's murder and there was a big uprising. There was a big technological boom. I'm from Barbados, and my sisters and I joke that like the pandemic brought Barbados into the 20th century in terms of a lot of things that never ever happened online before. And people were objecting to, no, everything's in person because it's a small island. And actually having things in person is one of the things I love about Barbados. But also it was nice, it was a committee that I was on at the time, and it was nice that we could agree to meet online, right? And I don't think they ever would have agreed to do it before. And now it's another option that wasn't an option before. So I think, technology really came into play in the pandemic. And the other thing I will say for you as a musician, I think Black musicians and music and protests, there's always been this link for, I think, just having a musical, presence, even in a time of an uprising. And I think that is something that you can't separate. You can't, I think of like the 60s and, so much of the music that came out of that time that was coming up around the civil rights movements, even in the US. And so I think you also can't separate people of African descent and their music from this time of uprising and protest.
Absolutely. I mean, even at the beginning, we had prayer at the beginning to open the event, the online event. Now I say prayer, it was really a calling to our ancestors to bless the protest. So we brought in a number of, African traditions, if you like, to really center, the African experience in the protest in a way that, was really unique to the event. So I would say that's a connection to the vigilance to Black joy.
Yes.
Black space.
Yes. And also to me, the sort of, part of the reason I started this podcast was because I felt like the narratives that are told about, people of African descent, whether it's in African Americans, Caribbean, UK, wherever, diaspora it felt very one-sided to me. And I was like, there's no person is just one story, that's my quote from Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. Like people they have multiple stories. They're multiple. And so this idea that even in the face of a protest, there's prayer, there's music, there's drumming, there is you're still bringing all of those things into play, even in the face of this thing that's happening. And so to me, I think that's really important. I want to talk a bit about DAWTA. Am I saying it right?
You probably are saying it better than me, to be honest.
No, it's yours. It's your work. But, I'm from Barbados, so I know that may not be a phrase that we use that much, but I know it started as a one-woman musical performance. You now have a podcast under the same name, which we may get into later, depending on whether we go off talking about other things. But I know you described it as semi-autobiographical, and it's about Sarah, who was born to a Jamaican mother, adopted by a white family in the early 1970s. Sarah is on a quest to find her way home, whatever the cost. So tell me a little bit about what made you decide to write and perform what I imagine is probably quite a deeply personal piece of work.
Well, it was. Not anymore.
Not personal anymore because you performed it in front of thousands of people. And it's what's interesting. In season 1, I had a guest to the podcast called Isis, and she lives in the US. She's a teacher, and she also performed a one-woman show about her experience in education. And it's just amazing to me how someone can take those personal experiences and just put it out there and perform it. So I have questions. So tell me a little bit about what made you write and perform that in the first place.
So it was the fact that I am a transracial adoptee. So I was born to a Jamaican mother, or to one culture, and then raised in a white culture. Predominantly, that is the framework of transracial adoptees. They usually are from one culture, and usually the receiving group, if you like, is white culture. Mm-hmm. to white adoptive parents. And so that was my experience in the 1970s. It's a practice that has been around probably from about, post-immigration of the Windrush here, 1950s through to current day. It's still a practice that is in place where a child of color from an Asian or African background is adopted by white parents. And there's a variety of issues that surround that. If you think about the societies that we live in, where there is systemic and institutional racism, if we think about the family being a part of that structure, then you can imagine the issues around race, power, identity, abuse in some cases can occur. And so on the death of my adoptive mother, so that would be about 10 years ago now, 5 years before I wrote the musical, on the death of her, so much, there was just like a sea of emotion, waves crashing. Anger was one of the biggest emotions that I felt. And I often write from a place of emotion. That's definitely my signature, if you like, very autobiographical and very emotional. And so I really had this very rich soil to work with of anger, and anger against my adoptive mother for dying, for leaving me, but also leaving me untethered, because I had this sense of belonging to her, this black child belonging to this white woman, who had adopted me, taken me from my community and raised me in a rural white area. And so I was tethered to her, and then suddenly she leaves. And so the first iteration of DAWTA was about me and her and our relationship. And I initially wrote it about how she felt about not being able to have her own child. So it was about her fertility journey. And then I showed it to a director who I have so much respect for, actually, Nancy Medina, the artistic director of Bristol Vic, and said, look, what do you think? What do you think about this piece of work? Will you just, look it over? And she was like, okay. But where are you? How do you feel? And that changed everything.
Yeah. I love that. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. And I have a million questions. So you talk about Sarah finding her way home, right? So I imagine that must be complicated for I think, there's lots of things that come into play. Obviously, you're as a transracial adoptee, but as you talk about, Windrush, and my aunt, she came over to London. It must have been either the 70s or the 80s. I'm not going to pretend to remember because I was very tiny at that point. And, she would have had her family here and stuff like that. And they have other family members that moved to the States, Canada. My dad moved to Canada, actually. I was in Canada for the first few years of my life.
Wow.
And, I feel like that just gives you a kind of a complicated relationship with home, because I almost sometimes feel like you get pulled, having then, for me, I wasn't even born in Barbados. I was born somewhere else. Then I was in Canada, moved to Barbados. Then I moved to the UK. And it's like, you feel like you're pulled in a million different directions. And then to add on top of that, the family dynamic of having a family that is a different culture. So, I just want to acknowledge that. That's a lot to try to fit into even an entire performance, right?
Yeah.
By the end of it, what were you hoping that an audience member would walk away from it with? What were you hoping they would be thinking about when they walked out of the theater?
Yeah, that's a question that always gets me a bit stuck, because I don't, particularly when the Arts Council asks things like that, in regards to funding and stuff. And I'm more selfish than that, to be honest. I wasn't particularly thinking about the audience, really. I was feeling about the need to express myself. It was more about, my motivation was not really about what the audience would feel or take away from it, but more about being seen.
Yeah. And by the way, right, I think that's a great reason to write or create anything. It's one of those things, like, I always, like, I've written books and stuff over the years, and people ask, oh, why did you write it? Because I wanted to write it.
Yeah.
I felt like it was good.
Yeah.
Like, I don't have anything else.
My motivation, to be quite frank, was the fact that myself, as many transracial adoptees or adoptees are, we're secrets.
Yeah.
People haven't told anybody. Our birth mothers often have not told anybody of our existence.
Yes.
So we live in this kind of liminal space of in-between worlds that no one actually even knows. So we exist in this kind of limbo, almost waiting to be, waiting to become, waiting to be seen, waiting to be acknowledged, waiting to be claimed. And so for me, this was a revolution in my life to say, I'm here and you will see me and I will be heard and I will be acknowledged. Yeah. So that was my motivation. It was about telling my story. And I know we're going to come on to the fictional parts of it.
Yes, we're going to talk.
But it was about me standing up and saying, I am here.
Yeah, I love that. And to me, like I said, I think it's so important to tell those stories. And actually, part of the reason I want to talk a little bit about the fictional part of it is because I think that fiction is so good at that. It's so good at telling the truth in a way that is accessible, more so sometimes than if you're on a documentary or on the news or whatever, like, fiction is a lot more accessible to me in that way. One of the things I'm curious about, you talked about feeling anger towards your birth mother. And I know I think about, not your birth mother. I'm sorry. You said your adoptive mother.
Yes.
But you didn't talk about how you felt about your birth mother. And the reason I asked is because I think of, I guess, as you grow into an adult, you understand things more, how you feel about things changes, and sometimes that can feel in a conflict with those emotions that you're feeling about these real people. First of all, how did you feel, I guess, about because you talked about it being a secret, but how did you feel about the entire situation? And also, how did writing and performing the piece, did that change how you felt about it?
Okay, which one should I answer first?
Darn it. First, I'd love to. I'm curious how you were feeling about it from the perspective, how you felt about
my birth mother.
That's okay. Let's go with that. That wasn't what I was going to ask, but yeah, let's go with that. How did you feel towards your birth mother, but also just about the whole situation as a whole? Because I think it's one of the things I know, having grown up in the Caribbean. One of the things I know is that people have this belief that countries like England and the US and things are better. People have this real belief about that. And so when people make decisions based on the things that they believe, but you're the person that has to live with it, right? So I was just curious what your feelings were about, about your birth mother, but also about the situation, and if that changed through the process of writing and performing.
Okay, well, I think two different things there. I think what this question connects with is the whole issue of transracial adoption in the context of these ideas that we have around race.
Yes.
Supremacy.
Race and police and supremacy. Yes.
Yeah, basically. And how transracial adoption sits very central to these issues around white supremacy. Mm-hmm. And how that has played out through history, and how we have language and words around, with critical race theory and understandings around decolonizing the mind, decolonizing practices, education, systems, etc. We're starting to sort of go further into that space, but this is work that's been done since the 1960s, 70s.
Absolutely.
But the practice of transracial adoption endures. And so it seems to me the question is, how does transracial adoption endure within this context?
Within this context, but also it's not just, to me, I'm like, it's one thing to talk about it enduring and transracial adoption, but it's another thing to be a human being experiencing it. Right?
Yeah. And I suppose words that my responses would be that as transracial adoption sits within this context of race in Western society, that as the language has changed in society, as our understanding has changed in society, so has the experience of these families, these transracial cross-cultural families. And so in the 1970s, I didn't have language like gaslighting and, I'm being gaslight, or my experience is not being understood, or I'm not being seen, or I'm being overlooked. There's unconscious bias. I'm being told off in the classroom. I'm fairly policed in what I do, my behavior. I didn't understand that. I didn't have language for that, even though I was experiencing that as a Black child living in a completely white community with no other Black people to share my experience or to go to and ask. I had no teachers to show me or guide me. I had no family members to guide me about, racist interactions, my hair care, my skin care. I had no food, no cultural food to support my development. I had no cultural education whatsoever, and experience racism every day of my life in my home and outside of my home. And so that was the experience. That was my experience, of transracial adoption. How did writing the play and performing the play, I think, was the next question.
Yeah.
How did that help me?
Yeah, how did that impact?
How did that impact my experience? And I think one of the predominant feelings of writing the play, or the impact, was a sense of empathy for the characters, because I play 7 different characters across my transracial adoption close relationships and my birth relationship. So I play my birth mother, I play my birth brother, I play my adoptive mother, I play myself, I play, oh gosh, who else do I play? Oh, a hairdresser, and a pastor. Oh, and then a imagined character who is my alter ego, who is very, very important to the whole run-ins. So the impact was to have empathy. So I was able to put words in the mouth of my birth mother, who I've never spoken to in my life. So there was something very therapeutic around being able to have that relationship with somebody I've never spoken to,
Mm-hmm.
and control as well. I think that's not to be overlooked. The fact that a transracial adoptee exists in a life of not having any control and many decisions being made about them. And so now I was put through being the writer, I put myself in a position of control about what my characters, it was almost like a chess game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
And I was the winner.
Of course. So you should be. Why else would you write about it if you can't be the winner? And the reason I like that so much is because I think it speaks to, earlier when I was talking about how fiction has that ability to sort of showcase the truth in a really accessible way. I think that's also true for the writer, right? And so it gives the person who's watching it or listening to it that sympathy, but you have to feel that first and write it in order for it to be there. And I really, I thank you so much for sharing that. And
also I think that might then, Sophia, come back to your point or your question, around what did I want the audience to come away with? And actually through my pursuit of my own happiness and my own joy, perhaps that's what I wanted the audience to be inspired by, so they can pursue their happiness and their joy, and that they can be the winners, just like Sarah won.
Yeah. And to me, it almost speaks to being able to rewrite or reframe your own story.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
And I think that to me is sometimes the key to feeling joyful, even in the face of things that you may have experienced.
Another thing as well, actually, sorry.
No, just never be sorry.
I'm just, now I'm thinking about it, about what do I, want the audience to come away with. It is that standing up to be counted. It's standing up. I want audiences to come away with, I've got a story to tell too. And I've lived a life of shame around my Black identity. Mm-hmm. I've lived feeling that I'm not Black enough, that that I'm less than in regards to my Black identity, because so much was missing. But being able to stand up on a stage, tell my story that I have written, and be seen and unashamed, that was a really important part of the experience. And I hope that an audience will come away feeling like they can also stand in their truth unashamedly.
Yeah. And that a story is important, even if it's, I think sometimes people think their story is not important because they're not whoever or whatever, but I'm like, everybody's story is important. And I think it deserves for you to tell someone. You may not write a lovely musical about it and stand up and perform it, but someone deserves to hear that story, just as anybody deserves to have to be able to tell it.
That
and to
testimony. Testimony, yeah.
Yeah, and to tell it in a way that feels good and not shameful to them, which I love. So let's talk a little bit about the fictional aspects of it. You talked a bit about your alter ego and that being quite an important part of the performance.
She's called Nina.
Nina?
Yes.
I love it. Nina. Hey, Nina. What made you decide to bring in, you say a fictional character, but I don't think it's fictional at all. We have so many parts to us. And to me, sometimes one of the things I like about reading fiction is you can kind of read people's thoughts and their ideas, and you can get a peek into like their inner life, right? So to me, you just did it in a much cooler way. What made you decide to do that? When you were writing the play, how did you make those types of decisions?
How did I make my decision about Nina? About
Nina? Yeah, about Nina and also just to include it, because I think that's quite that's a different way to bring a person's inner world onto the stage. Like I said, when you're reading a book, you can read what people are thinking or whatever. On the stage, it's kind of more of a showing than it is a telling, you know? So what made you decide to kind of bring that on in that way?
I think it was to do with my own story, to explore my inner world. Nina is a symptom of the fracture of my birth self and my adoptive self. Fractures like this happen to adoptees often when they are taken and removed from their initial home or place of birth to another location. But also there's a fracture of their names are often changed and so they're born with a name. So Sarah was born as Nina.
Okay.
And then was taken to another location, a white location, and called Sarah. And so, but Nina, what happened to Nina? And that's what I was exploring. What happened to Nina, who was born in Birmingham? And then almost like there was a separation. And then Nina becomes a spirit. Sarah has the life and moves forward with her life, but there's this spiritual baby. And so it was exploring what happened and how did that baby feel about being left? And she didn't have anywhere to go. So she's just in again, that liminal space I spoke about. She's kind of just floating. But she's always with Sarah, but she's not able to connect. So it's about that interaction. Sarah's aware there's something that Sarah can sense throughout the piece, and it's Nina. And so we see Nina kind of speaking to Sarah throughout the piece.
Okay. The other thing, and I love that sort of, I love that you've imagined that interaction there. Because, you know, I think we can all identify with our other selves, and even those unlived lives. Like sometimes I think about those, you know, that me that wanted to do something else with her life.
Yes.
What is she?
Of course.
I call it, in my head, I always say somewhere out in the multiverse, there's this version of me that's living a completely different life.
There you go.
And sometimes you can absolutely hear them. Like, I don't know. I know that sounds a bit weird, but I definitely understand that.
Doesn't sound weird to me.
I love that.
And I lent into that, and I lent into it particularly around, it helped me explore my identity. It helped me because Nina is Jamaican. She's, you know, she speaks patois. She's everything that she would have been in my imagination. So again, coming back to the fictional part, Nina's a fictional life unlived.
Yeah.
And she's Jamaican.
So you get to explore that.
Yeah.
So I am curious, and you mentioned a little bit about this earlier, developing empathy by playing a number of characters. But how do you, Dionne, how do you do it? Because I'm not a professional. I'm one of those people that does very amateur theater. And to me, just to be one character is like hard enough. Okay. So I'm just going to be very upfront with that. How do you switch, and I just don't even know what question to ask. Like, how are you able to embody all of these different characters in a way that is authentic to the character in the moment, right? And not to be, you know, to me, it's almost like code switching on steroids. Like, not to
I love that code switching on steroids. That's so wicked. Well, front and center, I have to say, Hannah Loon, who I think uses her surname Adibuteng, DAWTA's director at large, Hannah. I have to say front and center, working with Hannah to explore these different characters, the whole process that Hannah put me through. And we went through together around the characters, the work that we did on each individual character was integral to the process, seeing each character in their entirety. That was the work that we did. There was obviously the clever physical transitions that we were able to do, which was, I think, using both of our expertise around finding creative ways to move from one character to another. So it was just really, that was it. That's how we did it. And I am an actor who really gives myself to the work, to the work. And so I just dedicated myself to, it was also the tone of voice of the characters, the accents of the characters. So I was doing patois, I was doing a Birmingham accent. I had to think about the age. So playing my birth mother, who's Jamaican and 65, 70. So it's also about aging her voice, not only when she talks, but also when she sings. So how do you sing as an older person and the characteristics of an older person? A lighter voice, maybe a more operatic tone that you would get from a church lady. So it was looking at all those different techniques to embody the characters and just dive in and dive in and want to make the best piece of work that I've ever made. And I achieved it.
I love it. I absolutely love that. And what was your proudest moment?
I think there's been many. It doesn't have to be the proudest. I know I don't choose favorites, so I won't judge you for not choosing. Yeah, I'll say a couple.
A proud or a memorable or a couple of proud memorable moments that you had.
I guess at different venues, different theatres, seeing people that I love from my community, so from Devon, so my white friends of my mum who had died, obviously, my adoptive mum, so her peers coming to see my work and to, like I said, it's a testifying to this is what I went through, and some of the moments are brutally honest. And for them to be in tears, to be proud, to acknowledge my experience. And my friends, from school to be acknowledging my experience and, the conversations around we never knew. And then to maybe most importantly, my other transracial adoptee peers who I've never met, who've come to the show, who feel that they've been seen and that doing it for them, telling our story and doing it for them and for them to be able to then go or bring their friends, bring their, I've got some people who came and saw the show 4 times, so I think it does come back to what it gave the audience, but also what it gave me. I'm just proud to have done it and I did it.
Yeah, I love that. And the thing is, you talk about, when I said to you, like, what do you want the audience to walk away with? And your point was like, it was, it felt selfish, although I don't think it is. But I also think it's a testament to how sometimes as a creative, just doing the thing that you want to, making the thing that you want to create so that you can feel seen, and people will still walk away from it with something regardless. And so not to be afraid of that, because I think sometimes because it kind of feels selfish,
yes,
people don't always feel inclined to do it. Right. Because my very first book I self-published and there was a lot of my own story in there. And after I did it, I had some people they were like, oh my gosh, that was so brave. Cause, I don't know if my story would be important enough to be told. And I was like, well, it is, but also, and if that's the only reason that you do it, that's fine. But trust and believe people will get something from it, regardless of whether that was your intention or not. And I think that's really important. What might you do differently next time? There's never going to be another DAWTA. So, as in, there'll be other performances, I know, but this one is unique in its way. So, but what might you do differently if you were doing another performance that was, maybe personal or maybe had that type of format? What might you do differently? Or what do you want to try next? Cause when I say sometimes what do you want to do differently, people think I'm talking about mistakes, but I'm not. Sometimes when you do something, you're like, ooh, I want to make it this next time. So what might you want to do differently or additionally next time?
Yeah, I think I'm in the place where I'm wondering who I am as a writer, because that was the big thing that I did. I've never done anything before that. It's the first play that I'd ever written, first musical, first kind of complete piece, although I'm a songwriter as well.
Of course.
So I'm songwriting at the moment. So that's where my creativity's going. But I wonder, is it going to be another autobiographical piece? Is that who I am? Is that what I do? Is that my thing? Or what if I did something that wasn't about me? Or inspired by identity, belonging? What would I be like if I wanted to tell a horror story? What would a horror story look like to me? What am I scared of? And what would that look like? I guess, horror in a way intrigues me, and it's not, my horror will be probably very different to a white male.
It better be. I've seen some of those.
Do you know what I mean though? Because that's what we have, these traditions. So maybe horror. Maybe it'd be interesting to see what I'm scared of spiders. What would my horror film look like?
Well, I wait to see it. I'm looking forward to seeing what you create next. Oh, this has been, I've enjoyed this conversation so much. Can I just say, for every question I've asked, there's been at least 10 questions I have not asked. All right. So we will have to have you back on for sure. I'm super looking forward to that. So I am just going to switch gears now, and we're going to move into the Joy 5. So I set a 5-minute timer. I'm just going to throw some questions at you. I know you can do some improv, so we're going to go.
Been a while.
So let's do it. What is bringing you joy right now?
This conversation.
Oh,
this conversation is bringing me life. It's bringing me back to my creativity that I don't talk about often. So yeah. It's holding a mirror up to my creative thoughts, and that's beautiful.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. I'm glad it's making you as joyful as it's making me, because I am loving it. What is something that you want to try for fun? It doesn't have to be in the creative realm. It could be anything in life.
Try for fun. I wouldn't mind getting my roller skates back on again, my roller boots. Ooh. I recently went to a festival and they had a roller rink for free that you could, We Out Here festival, and you could get on and do it. And they had amazing music going on. So I didn't do it. Time didn't allow, but I did look at it and think, oh, that looks fun. And I used to have roller boots when I was younger, and I'm into doing, recreating some of my youth.
Oh, I like that. Let me know how that goes. What returns you to joy? Cause I wanted to ask you this when you were talking about the play, because I'm like, performing something that is that personal and that emotional, I imagine would kind of take it out of you, So like, what returns you to that place of joy?
I love swimming.
Oh.
I love swimming. I love swimming. I love being in water. There's something so spiritual, cleansing. It holds you. Some adoptees have talked about it being like that amniotic, literally that space, that womb-like place for a child. You know, it returns us to that womb-like state. It's really healthy. Yeah, it holds.
No downside.
It holds me.
I love it. I love swimming too, so I really like that. A quote that represents or brings you joy.
Well, I can tell you the quote that I use for DAWTA. And it's scripture.
Yeah.
We walk by faith, not by sight. We walk by faith, not by sight. 2 Corinthians 5:7. That is what I live by. We walk by faith, not by sight. And that's what DAWTA is all about. And I live that in my daily life.
Oh, I love that. What is something that you dread, but always makes you feel good afterwards?
Well, it's not spiders.
No.
Let me think. Something I dread, but always makes me feel good afterwards. Focused work. Getting down to do those tasks that I don't want to do. My life admin or editing a podcast.
Editing a podcast.
Oh my gosh. I did 2 like on Sunday. Sunday and Monday. It took me 2 days of editing and I dreaded that, but I felt good afterwards.
Excellent. Tell me, what is something that always makes you laugh?
My friends.
Yeah, that's good.
My friends.
I love it. What do you see as the connection between your creativity and joy? How does that?
What do I see as the connection between my creativity and joy?
Yeah.
Self-expression.
I love it. And last but not least, what are you dreaming about?
What am I dreaming about? I remembered a dream the other day and then I forgot it. And I was like, oh, I've remembered it for once. I should have written it down.
That's okay. You forgot it. I have to say, I'm one of these people that has recurring dreams. So I've gotten very good at remembering them because I just tell it to somebody else, and that's built that memory. So if you want to remember your dreams, tell them to somebody else, and you'll definitely find it easier to remember them.
I often dream about teeth.
What?
Yeah, falling out.
It's not a stress dream. I'm sorry to say. I also dream about teeth falling out occasionally, and people ask me, because I work with teeth, so people always ask me, is that because of your job? I'm like, no, that's a stress dream.
Yeah, I think quite a lot of my dreams are processing stress dreams.
Yeah.
Yeah, things like that, or about to fall off a cliff or something. Do you know what I mean? It's a lot of that.
Yeah, or that classic. I do sometimes. In fact, I think I had it recently. That classic. You go to something and you're naked. Or like I literally had that dream. So I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah.
Oh,
but I sleep well though. I enjoy sleeping.
Me too. I love it. So, thank you so much for joining me in this conversation. You did mention a couple of times about having a podcast. Also has the same name as your play, DAWTA. So tell us a bit about the podcast, and I'll drop links so that people can go and hear more of you.
Yeah. So DAWTA, the podcast, is available on any of your platforms. Wherever you get your podcast. And it really centers the stories and experiences of transracial adoptees. In season 1, you will find that I'm co-hosting with Lisa Marie Simmons, who's a fabulous writer, transracial adoptee herself. And we have therapists who also give their thoughts around different themes. So, for example, the fog, birth fathers, transracial adoptee sons and their voice. There's a variety of themes in that first season. And then season 2, which I'm doing at the moment, is about well-being. What do we as transracial adoptees do for our well-being? So from weightlifting to climbing to DJing, it's all in season 2.
I'm looking forward to, I started to listen to the one with, lifting weights, the lifting. So I'm going to finish that one and then I'll dive into a few more. So I'm looking forward to that as well.
Wonderful.
I'll drop some links. Go and listen to more Dionne if you haven't had enough for in this conversation. I certainly haven't, so I'm going to go and find some more episodes.
And also, if there's any transracial adoptees listening who are in the UK, we also do, or abroad, we also do online meetups. So if you do live abroad, then you can come to the meetups online, or we do in-person meetups as well in Bristol if you're in the UK, if you're UK based.
Thank you very much. I will, what I will also drop is some links if anybody wants to hear about any events that you have. All right. So thank you so much, Dionne. This has been amazing. I really enjoyed it. And I look forward to catching up with you again, maybe one day.
And thank you for inviting me. It's been an honor and a privilege to have this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you as well. Thank you, listeners. I love you all. And we shall convene again soon. Thank you for joining us today. You can find out more about our guests in the show notes below. And don't forget to hit subscribe and share this episode with a friend. Until next time, I send you big love.